Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video we're going to be discussing a couple of things as we got some more injury updates, waiver updates, signing updates to talk about today. The St. Louis Blues have made a coaching change. Craig Berube is out as the head coach of the St. Louis Blues. We'll get to all of that, plus trade rumors involving the Blues, the Penguins, the Montreal Canadiens, and the Anaheim Ducks. And we'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello everybody and welcome back to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. We are so close to 200 subscribers. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do it without you guys, so don't forget to subscribe. Now, as usual, I'm going to start off by discussing a couple of signings that have happened over the past couple of days. They both involve the Washington Capitals. One's official, one's not official, so we'll get to one that's official first. And that is that the Washington Capitals have extended goaltender Clay Stevenson. Stevenson, an undrafted player, signed a 2-year contract with them a couple of years ago. He's in the final year of his deal. He needed a new contract for Washington Capitals, so the Caps signed into a 3-year contract extension with the AAV of $175,000 to continue to be the solid third-string goaltender for Washington Capitals. In the past, he's done all right. Last year, he had a .924 save percentage in 3 games with the Washington Capitals. He had a .916 save percentage in 36 games in the ECHL affiliate for the Washington Capitals, 3 games in the AHL, so he played in the ECHL mostly. He was also a little bit in the AHL, but this year he's actually been quite fantastic. So far he's playing 13 games for the Washington Capitals AHL affiliates, putting up a 1.70 goals against average and a .934 save percentage. He looks absolutely fantastic, and I think eventually he could possibly even be a backup at the NHL level. So this was a really good deal. He's not a rookie or anything. I think he's 23 years old, so he still hasn't played an NHL game up to this point. So I think eventually he could be a really good and solid backup goaltender for Washington Capitals, so it will be interesting to see. This is a very good signing in my opinion for the Washington Capitals. It's a very low risk signing, 3 years, $775, completely variable in the minors, but with the way he's playing the AHL right now, I think once Lindgren's contract gets up, or if they possibly wind up moving Kemper in the future at some point, I think he'll have a very likely chance of being the Capitals' next backup. So really good stuff there for the Capitals. Stevenson's had a fantastic season. He's entering the final year of his deal. Caps wanted to keep him, so he signed to a 3-year extension with a $775 AAV. Really good stuff there for the Washington Capitals, and I think he's going to be a fantastic third stringer for the time being, but eventually a very fantastic backup. So really good signing there for the Washington Capitals. And the other signing that I want to get to here today, on Insider Trading on Tuesday, it said that it's just being finalized. It sounds like it will be announced soon. Maybe by the time this video gets to YouTube, it will already be announced, so I'll probably discuss this again whenever it officially gets announced. But it sounds like Ethan Bear is going to be heading to the Washington Capitals. There was a lot of talk that for a long time the Vancouver Canucks were a front runner. Then it sounded like there were a lot of other teams, Jersey, Pittsburgh, Washington, amongst others, that had some interest. And the Washington, we've heard over the past week, make a huge pitch to Ethan Bear to try and win him over, and it sounds like they have. It sounds like Bear will be going to the Capitals. It sounds like the deal will be a 2-year deal and somewhere around the $2 million range, so it sounds like the Capitals will be signing him in the not too distant future. Now, I'll touch on this whenever it happens, whenever the signing does become official, but it does sound like Bear will be signing with the Washington Capitals. So it sounds like the Bear saga is over, and the Capitals will be signing Ethan Bear. So that's a really good addition in my opinion. Bear's going to be a solid third pair of right shot defensemen, and he'll definitely be able to help stabilize that Washington Capitals defense. Who's actually been doing pretty well this season, keeping the puck out of their net. So really good stuff there for the Washington Capitals. Bear will be a fantastic addition, and it sounds like it should be announced in the not too distant future. So really good stuff there for Ethan Bear and the Washington Capitals. But like I said, it's not official yet, but there's a lot of speculation that, according to Insider Trading and some other sources too, Ethan Bear will be signing with the Washington Capitals, and it will be around a 2-year deal with AV of $2 million. So really good stuff there for Washington Capitals. Going over to a couple of waiver updates, we saw in our last video that Boris Katchouk and Dmitry Samorukov with the Blackhawks and Penguins respectively have been placed on waivers. Both did indeed clear. I said there was a very likely chance that Samorukov was going to be cleared. I would have been very surprised if someone wound up claiming him. He does wind up clearing. Then Katchouk, I said there was a little bit more likely chance that he winds up being claimed, but it's not guaranteed, and he does wind up clearing too. So the Blackhawks keep their young bomb 6 forward, and the Penguins keep their decent 7th-8th defenseman in the minors for now. And if they run into some more injury trouble, Samorukov, I'm sure, will be a huge call-up option. So really good stuff there for the Penguins and for the Blackhawks. Meanwhile, we've seen 2 more players be placed on waivers. On Tuesday, we saw Jacob Vrana be placed on waivers by St. Louis Blues. Now, we talked about this on Tuesday. We thought that there was a very lucky chance he was going to be placed on waivers on Monday. He did not indeed be placed on waivers on Monday. The Blues sounded like they were sort of re-engaging in trade talks, and now he has been placed on waivers, and he's now not exactly sure sure if he's being sent to the minors or not, but he has indeed cleared waivers. So I'm not exactly overly surprised that happened. Vrana is making 2.6 or 2.5, I'm correct, $1 million on a cap hit. He is in the final year of his deal, but at that cap hit, I don't think very many teams would have the cap space to add him as a player who was claimed off of waivers. So I'm not overly shocked he wound up clearing. I still think the Blues will try and find a trade for him. He has not worked out overly well this year in St. Louis. If he does wind up going to the minors, I think he'll definitely have a solid top 6 role, a solid chance to prove that he's still a really good forward, and I think maybe closer towards the deadline we do see Vrana possibly removed, but he has been placed on waivers and cleared waivers, so whether that's him remaining as like a healthy scratch or a bottom end forward at the NHL level, or we move to the minors, I'm not exactly sure. But like I said, he's making over $2 million. I'm not exactly surprised that there were no takers on his contract. I'm not overly shocked about that. And I did think that there was a very likely chance that Vrana was going to probably wind up clearing when he was placed on waivers. So not overly surprised there. Vrana has been placed on waivers. Vrana has indeed cleared waivers. And now I think there's a very likely chance that in the, maybe not near future, but at some point, Vrana will be moved by the St. Louis Blues and be given another opportunity elsewhere. So really good stuff there for the St. Louis Blues. And then we saw a player be placed on waivers yesterday in Jacob Zboril. Zboril is a former first-round pick for Boston Bruins. Hasn't really worked out the way they wanted him to work out. He's been a decent third pair defenseman over the past couple of years, but with Mason Lohrei's really good start to the season, with Mitchell sort of finding his way onto the NHL roster, with them signing Kevin Shattenkirk in the offseason, Zboril's really fallen down the depth charts. He's more of like an 8th, 9th defenseman at this point in time, so they didn't really have too much space on the NHL roster for Zboril at this point in time after calling up a couple more defensemen like a Lohrei, so they wound up placing him on waivers. Now there's a possibility he could wind up being claimed at this point in time. I'm not sure if he does wind up getting claimed or not, but Zboril's a decent, in my opinion, third pair defenseman. I think he's just been boxed out of the Boston Bruins defensive core, and if he does wind up clearing waivers, it sounds like he could be another trade option there for the Boston Bruins. It sounds like he could be a very good trade option for the Bruins as possibly a trade chip, whether it be to bring in a pick or a prospect or an underperforming young player, or whether it be in a bigger package to try and bring in something to majorly upgrade this team. It will be interesting to see, but Zboril has been placed on waivers. I do wonder if there's a team out there who tries to claim him. I got this year left on his deal, $1.1 million. I'm not exactly sure if there's a lot of teams out there who can really afford a $1.1 million cap hit, and I think this is possibly a guy who could possibly be moved and traded. I wouldn't be overly shocked if he wound up clearing, given the fact that his cap hit is not overly great, and he hasn't done overly fantastic the last couple of years, but I do think given the fact he's still on the younger side, has high upside, he could be a decent third pair defenseman. I think there could be some teams who do have some interest in him, so it will be interesting to see, but Boston's placed Zboril on waivers. I'll have to wait and see if he winds up clearing or if he winds up being claimed by another team, so that will be interesting to see, but Zboril is on waivers. I'll have to wait until later in the day if he does wind up clearing or if he winds up being claimed. Going over to a quick injury update from the past couple of days. Not a whole bunch of injury updates, but there are a couple here. First, this is the Winnipeg Jets. Kyle Connor's injury update has been updated. His knee injury is going to keep him out for the next 6 to 8 weeks. That's an awful blow for the Winnipeg Jets. Awful. They lose their top goal scorer for the next month and a half to 2 months. That's awful news for the Winnipeg Jets. A horrible blow to their team. Then the Chicago Blackhawks lost Seth Jones due to an upper body injury. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time. Kane Korzak has an undisclosed injury for Vegas Golden Knights. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time. Victor Hedman's upper body injury was updated. He did miss the game against Vancouver Canucks. He's day-to-day right now. But then Anthony Duclair, William Eklund, and Luke Cunningham have all been cleared to play for the San Jose Sharks. So really good stuff to see shoving the Sharks get back into game action. Nico Sturm has an undisclosed injury. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time for San Jose Sharks. Really good stuff there. Scott Mayfield has an upper body injury. He's going to be out for day-to-day right now for the New York Islanders. Sebastian Aho was clear to play for the New York Islanders. Matthias Samuelsson and Alex Tuch for the Buffalo Sabres, and Eric Holla for the New Jersey Devils have all been cleared to play and should be able to get back into game action in the not too distant future. Meanwhile, Vladislav Gavrikov's injury with the LA Kings has been updated. His lower body injury is going to keep him out for the next week to week. So interesting stuff there. Not too many injury updates, like I said. Good to see some of these Sharks and some of the Sabres get back, be healthy, seem to be ready to return to game action. So really good stuff there. But bad news to see Connor go down with an injury that's going to keep him out for the next couple of months, as that's a really bad blow to the Jets. In fact, he was one of the league leaders in goal scoring. Gavrikov's going to be a big blow to the Kings D core. He's going to be out week to week right now, and some other really bad injury updates with guys like Victor Hedman currently out right now, as well as Seth Jones. So interesting stuff there. Really bad injury updates for some of these teams, but still some really good injury updates to see guys like Cunnin and Eklund and Duclair and San Jose, and Tuch and Samuelsson in Buffalo get back into game action. So really good stuff there. Next, we go over to an interesting update here from the St. Louis Blues. The St. Louis Blues wind up firing their head coach, Craig Berube. Now, the Blues have been absolutely atrocious this year. They've been good at some points. They've looked really, really good. Their defenses look good. Their offenses look fantastic. But at some points, this team has not looked good. They're on currently a 4-game losing streak. They've gone below 500. They're currently second runner-up in the wildcard race. They're only 1 point out of the Arizona Coyotes for the last wildcard spot, but they're still not doing overly well. They still don't look overly fantastic at this point in time, and they look like a team who's probably, at this point in time, I wouldn't be surprised if they would miss the playoffs. I expect them to miss the playoffs in the preseason. I could definitely see them miss the playoffs again right now. So after the 4th loss to the Red Wings on Tuesday, the St. Louis Blues wound up announcing that they would fire head coach Craig Berube. So that's an interesting move there. Berube has definitely been a really good head coach. He helped the Blues win the Cup back in 2019. He was a fantastic coach. If you look at his coaching history, he was an assistant coach for 7 years with the Philadelphia Flyers. He was then a head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers for 2 seasons from 13 to 15. He was then associate head coach after a couple of years of time off from 17 to 18 with the St. Louis Blues. He was then promoted to interim head coach from 18 to 19, and then he's been head coach from the past 4 years for St. Louis Blues from 19 to 23. So Berube has been a head coach for the last 4.5 seasons for St. Louis Blues, a full head coach. So there's a lot of talk that Berube could wind up being one of the guys who was fired early on in the season. In the offseason, one of the guys who was probably coming in the hot seat, and he does wind up getting fired. He had a contract that was still intact for this year plus next year, so he still had a 1.5 years left on his contract. So the Blues are still going to be paying him for those 2 years, but it does seem like that was possibly the right move. I don't think it was all on Berube's fault. I think the construction of this team, given the fact this team didn't do anything in the offseason, is a huge reason why they're not doing overly well right now. That defense needs work. Even though Canadiens had a really good bounce-back season, they still have not gotten very much offense from this team. And I think the on-ice product needs to be worked on too. It can't be ignored, but still, really good stuff there from Berube, who led this team to their first ever Stanley Cup championship, who was an absolutely fantastic head coach for St. Louis Blues, and he winds up getting fired. So like I said, I'm not exactly surprised that he wound up getting fired, but I don't think it was the right move at this point in time. I think he's done all right coaching the St. Louis Blues so far this year. So I definitely think that for the Blues, this was an interesting move. I don't think that Berube was absolutely at fault here, but I definitely think that he was one of the guys who could have easily been fired. So interesting stuff there for St. Louis. And then on top of that, they wound up bringing in Drew Bannister as the interim head coach. Bannister doesn't have really much of NHL experience coaching at the NHL level, but he's going to be the interim head coach for the time being. And I don't think they've signed him to an NHL contract. It sounded like they're going to have him as the interim head coach, then sign someone to be their head coach in the next, hopefully in the not too distant future. So it sounds like Bannister for the time being will be the interim head coach. We'll see if Bannister is going to be able to turn the St. Louis Blues team around, or if the Blues do wind up falling a little bit still. They're still 1 game below 500 right now. They're still off a playoff spot, so it will be interesting to see if Bannister can turn this team around like Berube wasn't able to, or if the Blues are going to still continue to fall in the standings. So it'll be really interesting to see. But Bannister's in as the interim head coach. Remember, not a contract extension. They're going to try and find a full-time head coach later on in the season, or possibly in the off-season. But Berube has been relieved of duties, and even though he's got 1.5 years left on his contract, Berube is now not the St. Louis Blues head coach. So interesting move there, but the Blues have hired their head coach. They've hired Drew Bannister as their new head coach, and it'll be interesting to see if this sort of change winds up leading the Blues to getting back in the playoff race, or if they continue to fall in the standings. So it'll be interesting to see there. And lastly, we're going over to a couple of trade rumors. First, with the Montreal Canadiens, just a quick update here, but it sounds like the Montreal Canadiens, who are going to be a really busy team at the trade deadline. They're not doing overly well this year. They're below 500. There could be a team who's looking to move a lot of pieces at deadline. We've heard about Monahan. We've heard about the Vorak. We've heard about one of their 2 goaltenders in either Allen or Primo. Add another name to that list, and David Savard. In the offseason, there was some talk that the Montreal Canadiens may wind up moving David Savard. He's a decent third pair defenseman. He's making $3.5 million, which is a little bit much, in my opinion, for a couple of these teams. So they may want to ask Montreal to try and retain some of his salary. But he's a really, really good third pair right shot defenseman who knows what it takes to win in the playoffs. He's helped the Tampa Bay Lightning, if I'm correct, to either win the Stanley Cup or get to the Stanley Cup. He knows what it takes to win a Stanley Cup. He's a very good third pair right shot defenseman, and someone a lot of teams would want for the playoffs. And he's come back from injury. He missed the first 1.5 to 2 months of the season due to injuries. He's recently come back. He's even scored a goal in yesterday's game against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So he looks like he's really healthy now. He looks like he's back to being a healthy player. And I definitely think that if he continues to show that he's a really, really good third pair right shot defenseman, in Montreal over the next couple of months, he will be a very good trade target at the trade deadline. So it'll be interesting to see. But it looks like Savard may be a name we look out for as a possible trade candidate. So that's going to be interesting to see. But keep your eye out on David Savard, as now that he's back, expect some trade interest to be picking up on him over the next couple of weeks leading into the trade deadline. Going over to the Anaheim Ducks, David Pagnola of ForcePF.com is talking about a couple of Ducks that could be moved before the trade deadline, as the Ducks have really fallen off. Their 6-game winning streak is way behind them now. They're now a team who's way under 500 and one of the lower teams in the NHL. I think they're only 1 point back of the lowest spot in the league, so the Ducks have not done overly well this year. They've really lost a lot of games recently, and there could definitely be a really busy team come trade deadline time. Now, you talked about a couple of pending UFAs that could possibly be moved. You talked about Ilya Bushkin, a good third-pair right-shot defenseman in the final year of his contract. You talked about Am Henrique and Jakob Silfverberg, 2 decent middle six forwards, also in the final year of their contracts, making decent over $5 million amount of money. But 2 interesting names he mentioned that were having some interest and could definitely be possible trade candidates at the deadline would be Frank Vatrano and John Gibson. Now, these 2 guys I talked about at length this year. I've talked about Vatrano at some points. I've talked about Gibson recently, but I think there's a very lucky chance both of these 2 will possibly get moved. On Gibson's side, we've heard Gibson rumors for basically the past 1.5 to 2 years. A couple of years ago at the trade deadline, we heard his name possibly being in the rumor mill. We've also heard him the past couple of off seasons. Last year's trade deadline, there was even a little bit of rumblings. Maybe could Gibson be moved? I think after the sour start that the Anaheim's had this year, there's a very likely chance Gibson gets moved. Now, Gibson does not have an easy contract to get moved. Gibson's making, if I'm correct, $6.4 million for this year, plus I think 2 or 3 more seasons. So it wouldn't be an easy contract to move, but there could be a lot of teams who could have some interest in Gibson. I could see Edmonton have interest in Gibson to try and sort of solidify their goaltending position. I could see Jersey have some interest in Gibson. I could see Carolina have some interest in Gibson. There could be probably some other teams too. I'm not sure if Buffalo would have some interest in Gibson, or Seattle. It could be for those 2 teams be linked to possibly adding a goaltender, although I'm not sure if they would want a long-term solution. But I know Carolina seems to be a team who could use a goaltender. Edmonton, New Jersey, maybe there's a couple of other teams out there too. So watch out for Gibson. I think there's a very likely chance he could get moved by a deadline, or if not by the deadline, then I think in the offseason he'll be a very, very likely trade candidate. I don't think Gibson's future is in Anaheim long term, so it will be interesting to see. But I definitely think Anaheim winds up moving Gibson at some point. Frank Vatrano, same sort of thing. He's had a fantastic start to the year. He's been scoring at an unreal level. At this point in time, Vatrano's been an extremely good for the Anaheim Ducks. He makes just over $3 million for this year plus next year. He's been a really good top 6 forward for the Anaheim Ducks. He's put up 14 goals in 28 games. He's only 10 goals back of his career high in goal total, and he's got a full 3/4 of a season left to play. So Vatrano's been absolutely phenomenal, and I think that could lead him to have a lot of interest. I mean, a possible 30 goal scorer being available from the Anaheim Ducks could definitely be a very interesting thing. It would definitely take a really big package, given the fact that he's now a rental. He's played this year plus 1 more season. The Ducks could try and move him for maybe a first-round pick and a decent level prospect, in my opinion. So he could be a very good trade commodity come trade deadline time. And I think there would be a ton of teams who could use a Vatrano on a third line as a very good third-line goal scorer. So we'll have to wait and see. But on top of any UFAs like Henrique, Silfverberg, Ilya Bushkin, who I think could all possibly easily be traded by Anaheim Ducks if they were to retain some money on them, I think Gibson and Net could be a very interesting trade target come trade deadline time. And I think Vatrano on the forward group will definitely be a guy who garners a lot of interest. We'll have to wait and see, but according to 438.com, it sounds like Vatrano and Gibson are both going to be names to watch out for over the next little while as we get closer to the trade deadline. Going over to the Pittsburgh Penguins, according to Insider Trading, there were recent comments on Kyle Dubas saying that it will be reevaluated after the All-Star break. Now, according to Pierre LeBrun, there was no real cryptic meaning in this sort of comment, but there could possibly be. He said that the Penguins are not doing overly well this year right now. They've won back-to-back games. They're not in convincing fashion, but they're still back above 500, so that's good for them right now. But if the Penguins are out of a playoff spot by a decent amount come the All-Star break, could Kyle Dubas possibly wind up moving a couple pieces? Pierre LeBrun said at some point Dubas will try and start to think long-term for this team, given the fact that this team has not done overly well over the past little while, and this team is starting to get aging, and he says that Dubas signed a 7-year deal with the Penguins to sort of help this team rebuild in the future. Could this rebuild retool get kickstarted in the not too distant future if the Penguins aren't doing too well? If the Penguins aren't doing overly well at the All-Star game, could they look to possibly move some players? If you look at the Penguins right now, they do have a couple of pending UFAs who could possibly move if they were to be sellers. Jeff Carter's one of them. You have Jansen Harkins, Vinny Hinostroza, Rams Ohorna. You you have Ryan Shea, you have Chad Ruhwedel, you have backup goalie now Alex Nedeljkovic, but there could be a couple of other guys who, if they were really possibly sellers at the deadline, I could definitely see him move. One would be Marcus Peterson. He's got this year plus next year at $4 million. If they were to possibly consider moving some pieces, maybe he's the guy who winds up getting moved. Riley Smith could be another guy who comes to mind who's a possible trade candidate. This year plus next year at $5 million. Really, really good middle six forward who could definitely be a really good scorer for a lot of teams, so I could see a Penguins move him. But the one interesting name that I think could really be possible would be Jake Guentzel. Guentzel makes $6 million. He's a pending UFA. There's a lot of talk in the offseason that he wanted a new contract that was over double digits on his AAV, and there's a lot of talk that I think if the Penguins could possibly be sellers, maybe Guentzel winds up getting moved. Now, Guentzel and Crosby have worked really well together. I think they would rather pay Guentzel what he wanted than move him, but they already have over $14 million tied up in Guentzel and Crosby, not to mention the $10 million tied up in Rustin and Raquel, so I'm not exactly sure if they'll be willing to go over double digits to pay Guentzel, and if they're not willing to go over double digits to pay Guentzel, could they look to move him? Guentzel's a really good top six goal scorer, and I think there would be a ton of teams interested at the deadline if the Penguins were to move him. Now, I think if the Penguins were in a perfect world, they'll be in a playoff spot at the deadline, and they won't have to be sellers. But if they were out of a playoff spot by a decent amount, and like they are right now, and they don't make the playoffs, could they look to move guys like Guentzel, like Smith, like Peterson, if they were to be out of the playoff spot? I think there's a possibility, but it sounds like Dubas is going to be really evaluating this team at the All-Star break, and it sounds like if they're not doing overly well and they're possibly out of a playoff spot, maybe we see the Penguins be sellers this year. It was quite possible, but it'll be interesting to see. But it sounds like the Penguins could wind up being sellers, and I'm going to be interested to see if players like Pettersson, Smith, and maybe even Guentzel on the trade market. And lastly, we're going to St. Louis Blues. The Blues have made waves recently, firing their head coach like we talked about. Berube is out, Bannister is in as the interim head coach. Could we see more on-ice changes for the St. Louis Blues? Now, we've seen a coaching change. If this change is not going to be able to help them, if they're still, like I said, a team who's probably out of the playoffs come around the trade deadline time, could we see the Blues wind up making some moves? Now, we know that there's been a lot of talk recently that they could try and make some moves. If you look at their pending UFAs, it's not a huge list of guys who they have at pending UFAs. Marco Scandella, decent third pair defenseman, is a pending UFA. They also have Jacob Vrana, who was recently placed on waivers, a pending UFA. You also have Kasperi Kapanen, who's a pending UFA. You'll have Sammy Blais, who's a pending UFA. I think Scandella, Blais, Kapanen, and Vrana all stand a really good chance to possibly get moved if the Blues were to possibly sell off some pieces. I think there's a very lucky chance all three of them could get moved. But could they possibly look at moving some more interesting players? We've talked about this before, and I've seen some people possibly bring this up, that if they're not in a playoff spot come trade deadline time and the Blues want to try and make some changes, maybe guys like Parayko or Krug wind up getting moved. Krug has 3 years left at $6.5 million after this year. Parayko still has a long-term contract at $6.5 million. Both are really good top 4 defensemen. Krug can be a really good goal scorer. Parayko's a really big body, can really help in the top 4. I think there would be a ton of teams interested in these two players if they were to be available. We know Krug was available last year at the trade deadline. We know there was a lot of talk that he was going to be traded to Philadelphia in the offseason. That never happened because of his no move clause. So it will be interesting to see if that winds up happening. But Krug, it sounds like, could possibly be moved, maybe by the St. Louis Blues. It depends on if he's willing to be possibly traded. Same thing with Parayko. They all have no trade clauses, so it'll be interesting to see. I think Falk stays. I think there's a very likely chance so that if they don't do overly well over the next little while, guys like Parayko and Krug, who are solid top 4 defensemen who could definitely improve another team's top 4, could definitely be moved. And I think the Blues need some sort of a shake-up on the blue line because they've not looked overly good so far this year on the blue line. And maybe, I think this is a very less likely option, but Pavel Buchnevich has this year plus next year at $5.8 million. If they're not overly confident in re-signing him, I think there's a possibility he could possibly a trade candidate too if the Blues are sellers at the trade deadline this year. I think there's a very likely chance that's possible. Buchnevich now is more of a really good top 6 forward for the Blues, so I wouldn't say it's a very likely option that he winds up getting traded. But I think there's a possibility that Buchnevich could possibly be moved. I could also see them possibly move guys like Savard or Hayes. So it will be interesting to see. But after coaching firing by the St. Louis Blues, I think there's a very likely chance we could see a couple of trades this year for the St. Louis Blues, especially ones where they are sellers. And if that is true, I think there's a very likely chance that the Blues wind up moving guys like at least Vrana, Kapanen, Blais, and Scandella before the trade line. If not, they consider possibly moving a defenseman like a Kruger or Parayko, or possibly even a Buchnevich on the forward group. So it will be interesting to see. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this down in the comment section. Do the Blues wind up making some more massive on-ice changes to this team? Could they move Parayko? Could they move Krug? Could they move Buchnevich? or could they possibly move guys like their pending UFAs, Vrana, Kapanen, Blais, Scandella? Definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Do the Blues make a ton of changes, or could they possibly just move their pending UFAs as they were sellers at the deadline this year? Do the Penguins make some interesting moves at the deadline this year if they are sellers? Could they move Jake Gensel, or does he wind up staying, possibly signing a longer-term contract with the over double-digit AAV? Could they move a guy like Riley Smith? Could they move a guy like Marcus Patterson? Definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Love to hear your guys' thoughts on the Anaheim Ducks. Do they move Gibson by the deadline? Do they move Vatrano by a deadline? Are these two both going to be extremely likely trade candidates by a deadline? Definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Love to hear your guys' thoughts on Savard. Do you think Savard's a very likely trade candidate for Montreal Canadiens? I think personally he is, but it'll definitely be interesting to see. I think Savard's going to be a fantastic possible trade option there for the Montreal Canadiens, so that'll be interesting to see. And what else do you think about all the other things we talked about? The signings, the waiver updates, the injury updates, and Berube being fired by the St. Louis Blues. Definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. But that's what I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you really liked it, remember to subscribe down below. We are so close to 200 subscribers. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without you guys, so don't forget to subscribe. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so if you check that out, I'll leave a link down in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.